Hello and welcome to this edition of the Webster Tarpley Program. Here we are on Unbound Radio, and I'm speaking to you as usual from Washington, D.C. And if we can just get our automated bumper music fading into the background, as it soon will, we can get going with this week's briefing. Let me call your attention, first of all, I was on Coast to Coast AM last night. George Noory, his very interesting program. It's about 3.5 million listeners. He's got 500 stations. He's on Sirius satellite radio. And naturally, my job was to alert people to the Elizabeth Warren bill. It's now the Warren-Tierney bill. It's S-897 and H.R. 1979. H.R. 1979, S-897, Warren-Tierney. Co-sponsor is now Congressman John Tierney from Lynn, Salem, Nahant, Massachusetts. It's the district right directly north of Boston. Does it include Newburyport? We'll take a look at that. So this is moving along, and again, the main question right now, the question that is dividing those who are morally and intellectually and politically viable from those who are not, is their ability to see the potential represented by this bill, and above all, use it for the immediate result, to cut student loans to 0.75% interest rate, tremendous boon to the millennials who otherwise are going to be crushed. They're going to have their lives brought to a halt, and that is a terrible thing. It also establishes the principle that the Federal Reserve has to pay. Bernanke has to finance these student loans. That is a cornucopia of cheap credit, 0% credit, 100-year credit. We need it to start a recovery because the federal budget, the Treasury, is overloaded. It cannot be relied on to meet the entire credit needs of the United States. That's just absurd. And, of course, the zombie banks are focused on their own survival. They absorb resources. They don't do anything for the economy. So that leaves the Federal Reserve. Make Ben pay. Make Ben Bernanke cough up the money. And if you do that, you're going to take pressure off the Treasury. You're going to avoid the necessity of borrowing money. You will not have to have tax increases for whatever comes out of the Fed. Because remember, they can manufacture money out of nothing. And it's right that they do it because that is the credit-creating power of the United States of America. And in spite of all the naysayers and the nervous Nellies and the people who are running down the country, this is still the most viable economic entity. When you say the U.S. is bankrupt, you'd have to say bankrupt compared to what? And look around. The comparisons are generally not good. But let's look at the Warren-Tierney bill. On the plus side, we have co-sponsors in the Senate. We have Senator Begich of Alaska. We have Senator Boxer of California. We have Senator Landrieu of Louisiana. We have Senator Merkley of Oregon. Senator Rockefeller of West Virginia. And no, it doesn't mean that the whole thing is a plot by the New World Order. A little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. These are simply politicians endorsing a bill. On the House side, we've got, as we mentioned, Tierney of Massachusetts, Earl Blumenauer of Oregon, Rush Holt of New Jersey, Barbara Lee, valiant, the only one who voted. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley Program. It's Unbound Radio, and it's the afternoon of Tuesday, the 21st of May. Just to repeat that, I think I ran over into the station break, but the House sponsors of the Warren-Tierney bill are, first of all, Tierney of Massachusetts, Earl Blumenauer of Oregon, Rush Holt of New Jersey, Barbara Lee, and again, what Ron Paul claimed to do, she did do. Ron Paul voted for the Afghanistan war. He voted for the authorization to use military force. He voted for all of that internal dictatorship that he later decided he didn't like, right? Ron Paul against war and police state. He voted for it before he was against it. And then you've got Yarmouth of Kentucky and David Cicilline of Rhode Island. And I'm sure there will be more of these. So those are the co-sponsors. And if your senator or congressman is not on that list, you got to get on the horn and call them. And let me just facilitate that for you. You got to come out of your corner, right? You got to get out of your comfort zone sometimes, right? If you want to change the course of world history. And you've got to get on the horn, as I say. The Capitol switchboard is 202-224-3121. If you're an activist, you should virtually have that memorized. 202-224-3121. And then ultimately it's going to have to be signed by Barkey. And for that, it's the White House comment line, 202-456-1414. 202-456-1414. Now, a skirmish has occurred in the House Education and Workforce Committee. This is the Klein Committee, K-L-I-N-E. Congressman Klein is a reactionary Republican from Minnesota. And I'm told by my sources in Minnesota that he is vulnerable. He could be voted out of office anytime. There's a guy called Obermuller who's running against him. Klein was reelected with 54% of the votes. That's not a whole lot. He's vulnerable. But the Klein Committee did the following. Last Thursday, they had a markup on various student loan proposals. And one of the ones that they considered was H.R. 1979 S897, the Bank on Students Loan Fairness Act. And they voted it down. It was done on straight party lines. Every reactionary Republican voted against it. I'm reminded of the old headline in the New York Post. You can read about this in Surviving the Cataclysm, a good source for all of this stuff. In 1975, I think it was Mayor Abe Beame of New York turned to Gerald Ford, at that time the president, and said, look, you got to help us. We're going to go bankrupt. And the headline that resulted from Ford's reply was, Ford to City, drop dead. And I'm afraid the current headline would be, GOP to students, drop dead. Or there are some obscene and more violent versions of that, but you get the idea. GOP to students, drop dead. That's what comes out of the Klein Committee. And the ones we want to focus are Klein is the chairman. You want to make sure that Obermuller knocks out Klein in the next election. And another one is Buck McKeon. Buck McKeon. Watch out for grown men who call themselves Buck. This is a congressman from Simi Valley, and he is vulnerable to a challenge by a physician, a medical doctor by the name of Lee Rogers. But the worst of all in this committee, this Klein Committee, House Education and Workforce, is a Democrat by the name of Jared Polis, P-O-L-I-S, Jared Polis. And he bills himself as a new Democrat. That sounds like the Democratic Leadership Council, right? That sounds like the right-wing sellout version of the party. Remember, there's the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, and then there are the renegades, right? The new Democrats. Jared Polis, incredibly enough, I couldn't believe this when I looked it up. Jared Polis is the congressman from Boulder, Colorado. He's the only Democrat who voted against the Warren-Tierney bill. Jared Polis represents Boulder, Colorado. Why is this amazing? because that's the University of Colorado at Boulder. So these should be left liberals. They should be left oligarchs in some cases, fine. But certainly they would be highly interested. All those students and faculty and graduate students and all these people in Boulder, Colorado, highly interested in the Warren-Tierney bill. I would venture to say that a primary challenge to Jared Polis is already in the works. It should be, and the United Front Against Austerity, which is represented, we have people on the ground in that district right now. We will do whatever we can to make sure that this guy is primaried. But nevertheless, that will be for the future. Right now, we're left with the question of what comes next. Well, first of all, it's not the end of the world. This is just the House committee. And wait till you hear what they voted up. But remember, you can come back to this. The most obvious way is to come back to it in the course of a House-Senate conference committee, and or the Warren-Tierney bill needs to be rewritten. And this is becoming quite obvious. 1 year is not enough. It's not enough to just have a 0.75 interest rate on Stafford loans, the subsidized Stafford loans. We want to refinance unsubsidized Stafford loans, Perkins loans, plus loans. Plus loans are the ones the parents get. The consolidation loans, where it's refinancing of previously contracted debt. And then there are the private loans, right? Sallie Mae is now a private entity, and they could issue private loans, right? Their interest rates go way up there, 8, 10, 12%. So all of that has to be refinanced. So the goal of this ought to be to refinance as much of the $1 trillion of student loan debt as possible. And that should be imperative. And then there's this other technicality in the bill that the bill as written indeed specifies that the money to pay for these cheap student loans comes from the discount window of the Federal Reserve, but it says it has to be, this is paid for out of the earnings of the Federal Reserve, right? Something like 60, 70, 80 billion dollars per year. That's not enough. Make it just the inherent credit creating, the normal sort of general revenue, the general fund of the Federal Reserve. So this is where we're left right now. Now, wait till you hear what this committee voted up, the Klein Committee, right, on a strict party line vote, except for old Jared Polis, the renegade, whose career I hope will come to a rapid end as he's voted out of office. Here's the Republican bill now. Now, just remember, every percentage point is, if it's $1 trillion, right? Every percentage point of interest, since it's 1,000 billion, 10% of that would be 100 billion, and every percentage point is therefore $1 billion of interest gouged out of the millennials, their parents, and older people who have also gone back to school for degrees. So here's what the GOP says. They want to have it market-based, and they want it to be a floating rate. A floating rate. Isn't that wonderful? Haven't we had such a wonderful experience with floating rate mortgages where it balloons up, and floating rate derivatives? One of the advantages of the United States compared to Britain is that in the United States, when you buy a mortgage, let's say, you lock in an interest rate. You know what you're going to have to pay. In Britain, those poor guys have to expect that the interest rate will go up and down according to the market. And we found out what the market is, right? The LIBOR cartel, the illegal conspiracy and restraint of trade of 17 or so zombie banks fixed the LIBOR rate so they can fix the amount you have to pay on a mortgage. So anyway, the Republicans say they want to take the yield on a 10-year T-note, 10-year Treasury note, plus 2.5%. Well, right now the yield on a 10-year Treasury security is about 2%. So they're talking about 4.5% interest. Well, right now it's 3.4%, and they say, no, we're going to put it at 4.5%, but that can go up. And most people would expect, I think, that at some point in the future it will go up, if left to itself anyway, simply because right now the rate is historically quite low. So the Republicans then helpfully say, we'll cap it at 8.5%. Well, 8.5%. If the current rate is 3.4% on a Stafford loan and then it doubles to 6.8%, the Republican bill is worse than doing nothing, because they would allow it to go all the way up to 8.5%. Now that's a subsidized Stafford loan. How about a plus loan? The plus loan for the Republicans is the 10-year T-note rate plus 4.5%. And again, since that's about 2% on the T-note, 6.5% interest right away. Now that's I think significantly worse than what it would be otherwise. And then they helpfully say, well, we'll cap it at 10.5%. 10.5% of $1 trillion, right, is 100 billion plus of interest that's going to be gouged out of the American people. All right, so that's the Republican bill. And let's see if we can get in Obama before the station break. Here's the administration bill. Now, this is slightly different. Obama is also market-based. The only difference is Obama at least has the mercy of allowing you to lock in whatever the market rate is when you buy the loan, right? With the Republicans, it's going to jump up and down, mainly up. Obama says he wants to charge you for a subsidized loan, subsidized Stafford, the 10-year rate, again, call it 2%, plus 0.95%. So you're talking about 3%. It's too much. That's no good. Why pay 3% when you can get away with 0.75%, right? About a quarter of it. And then for the unsubsidized Stafford, 2.93 plus the T-note rate. So that gets you up to about 5%. This is absolutely bankrupt. There are other proposals. There's Gillibrand, who wants to finance everything at 4%. There's Durbin Reed. That would be R-E-E-D, not Dingy Harry, but the other Reed. This is absolute garbage. So I'm calling on people again. Mobilize. Fight. If you don't want to be a doormat for the Federal Reserve and Wall Street and these disgusting bought and sold politicians, you got to do something about that. If you don't like the way the Federal Reserve is run, then carve a piece of territory and nationalize it out of their bank. Make them pay for something you want. Don't just call them names. Don't just audit them and say, oh, you're corrupt. Make them pay. Hit them in the Labanza. Occupy, a lot of hot air. Never laid a glove on Wall Street. Never made them pay one dime. So you've got to do something about this. And I urge people, meaningful political action. And I'll compare what I'm suggesting to various Brand X solutions that are going on that are around that are getting really worse and worse, more and more suicidal as time goes on. So we'll be back in just a minute on the Webster Tarpley Program, Unbound Radio. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley Program. It is the afternoon of Tuesday, the 21st of May, as we put this program on. And we are calling on you to mobilize. It's time to contact senators and congressmen. It's time to lean on them. It's time to tell them that they will be primaried, they will be ejected from office by enraged students, enraged families, enraged older people, all of them crushed by $1 trillion of high-interest student loan debt. And the quackademic solutions coming from the Republicans, that is to say the smarter solution, which gets you up to 8.5%, or according to some accounts, 10.5%. 10.5% is $100 billion gouged out of the hide of the millennials. Or Obama, a little bit less extreme, but he still gets you up to about 3% to 5% for the two kinds of Stafford loan, whereas the Warren-Tierney bill offers 0.75%, 0.75%. So that's a no-brainer. And I'm also recalling all of that hot air we heard from the Ron Paul campaign, and they didn't like the Federal Reserve, and they were indignant about the Federal Reserve, and that had to be audited, and all of this malarkey. And now here comes, for the first time, the concrete proposal to do something to limit the lawlessness, the anarchy, the arrogance, the sheer outrage of helicopter Ben Bernanke saying, oh, zombie banks, including foreign zombie banks, Barclays, Deutsche Bank, Societe Generale, we have $27 trillion line of credit for you at virtually 0%. And the students are told, again, drop dead, you're going to pay increasing interest rates, and we're going to crush you. We're going to give a sweetheart deal to the banks that caused the depression with their derivatives speculation bubble, and we're going to make the students pay the cost of that, right? And we're told, oh, it's got to be linked to the market. We don't care about the market. There is no market. That is the biggest mystification of them all. There is no market. There are cartels. There are trusts. There are oligopolies, monopolies, duopolies. It's a drug market. It's a fixed market. And again, don't take my word for it. Just look at that LIBOR scandal, right? 17 zombie banks colluding, and none of them have gone to jail, right? Thanks to Cameron and Gordon Brown over there, and then Obama over here. So the Brookings Institution, right, shredding whatever residual credibility they ever had. The Brookings Institution explodes with rage at the Elizabeth Warren, John Tierney bill, saying this is a cheap political trick. It's embarrassingly bad. This is awful. It's not serious. Eliminate it. Right? And then they go on to talk about the serious proposals, which are the Republican proposal, the Obama proposal, and the Reid-Durbin proposal. So I am challenging Rand Paul. All of that hot air from Ron Paul and from Rand Paul, because he did it too, about the Federal Reserve, put up or shut up right now. All of that stuff meant nothing if you don't support the Warren-Tierney bill, because that is a bill that says we're nationalizing a piece of the discount window. And some people will say, I've heard people argue, oh, that's not good enough. We want to nationalize the whole thing. Yeah, that's wonderful. I would like to have a lot of things that are not immediately within my grasp. Let's be great realists, shall we? If you can't get the Warren-Tierney bill through, you certainly can't get more radical proposals through. And again, I would argue my appeal to the Republicans would be it will not add 1 penny to the deficit. It will not cause 1 penny of taxation. It will actually free up money in the federal budget right now that would normally go for student loans and now won't have to because Bernanke is going to pay. Bernanke will provide unlimited funds at the discount rate to the Secretary of Education to pay for these loans. So that is something you should support. And we'll be back in a minute on the Webster Tarpley Program. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley Program here on Unbound Radio. So take a look at Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net. Keep up with Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. And let me repeat it, it's Tarpley.net. That's my website, and Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. And if you look right now, you'll see yesterday's intervention I did on Coast to Coast AM with George Noory. The first hour, it's more like 40 minutes after he's done his introductory part. A couple of phone calls, but mainly getting out the word and challenging people. If you're not willing to help yourself, then you're lost. And it's just that simple. We need the intellectual, moral, and political viability to mobilize on something real. You can't sit in the corner with your survivalist food stocks, your gold, your gun, and imagine that you've done something. This is absolutely ridiculous. Such people will essentially be swept aside by the historical process. What I'm offering is a form of meaningful action. This is not information. It's a method. It's a method of analysis and a method of thinking. It's a philosophical or epistemological method, but it's also a method of action, and these are inseparable. If you don't like the world financier oligarchy, the question then is, what are you going to do? Call them names, or are you going to do something about it? Can you whittle away any of their power? Can you chip away at their power and add to your own? Pose the question of power, and this means political organizing, rational, programmatic, and that's what I'm recommending. Radical reform, a programmatic orientation. Obviously, you need program, you need an organization, you need leadership. You can't pretend there are no leaders, but they've got to be capable, qualified, and responsible, and they got to be upfront about what they're doing. And then you need a strategy. And our strategy is obviously try to implement the Wall Street sales tax, stabilize the federal budget, get rid of any argument in favor of austerity. The social safety net is sacrosanct. You don't touch it. You touch it, you go to Nuremberg. You'll answer in the dock at Nuremberg. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, WIC, food stamps, unemployment benefits. All of this is untouchable. So that means you're breaking with Obama on that. And then you got to get control of the Federal Reserve and use that to organize your recovery, right? $3.6 trillion could be issued by the Federal Reserve through a credit facility window, infrastructure facility window, and you could then begin to rebuild. You could get your infrastructure up from a D plus to a C, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers. We had Sandy in New York and New Jersey. We've got to get 0% century bonds, 0% 100-year credit, not only to rebuild, but then to rebuild the floodgates and the anti-inundation technologies that have to be built in. We've just had this tragedy in Oklahoma City, and I think this is a very good example. We have had some swinish behavior from those Tea Party lunatics out there, right? Imhoff and Coburn have been swinish in their attitude towards New York, New Jersey. They said, oh, we'll grudgingly let you have some disaster relief, but we demand that it be offset by killer cuts, by genocidal austerity elsewhere in the federal budget. I would recommend, if I were advising the Democratic Party, and stranger things have happened, I would say to them, what you need to do now in the wake of Oklahoma City and that tragedy, you need to get the most generous bill you can out there and teach people a lesson. That is to say, Oklahoma, you're going to get the most generous disaster aid, and indeed, the best way to do it would be 0% 100-year loans, nationalize another piece of the Fed, right? The Oklahoma City window, right? We know they had term auction facility, term mortgage-backed security facility. They had a special window for money market funds. They had a special window for primary dealers of treasury bonds. Let's have a Sandy, New York, New Jersey window. Let's have an Oklahoma City tornado window, and make it generous. And don't waste 1 minute on finding offsets in the budget. You can say, your elected representatives Imhoff and Coburn were swine when it came to paying for the necessary aid, and it was stingy enough for New York, New Jersey. We are going to show you what a concept of nationalism means. Nationalism means that we need Oklahoma. We've got to have a viable Oklahoma, a viable energy economy, and that the country is concerned about an important part of the whole. So go out of your way to make that a generous package. Don't retaliate. Don't try to pay those voters out there in Oklahoma in their own coin. Don't do that, because that is exactly the same small-minded, anti-national, sectional, stingy, penny-wise, pound-foolish stuff. Make it a generous proposal, and then take that from there. You will have shown people. Let Imhoff and Coburn vote against the aid package for their own state, because they'll say, "We're sorry, Oklahoma, but you've got dead that you're mourning. You're trying to clean up after this, but we will not approve," say Imhoff and Coburn, "a generous aid package to you without regard to offsets, because it violates the Austrian school and it violates our Milton Friedman crackpot lunatic theory of economics." So the nation takes care of all. It's a community of destiny, but it intends to promote the general welfare. Oklahoma is part of the general welfare. So one thing is get the Federal Reserve to cough up. So there are competing models of political activity. The one that I'm recommending has worked best in Europe, of course, in Greece with Syriza. They went from 4% to 27% of the vote. That's the best result that anybody has gotten in the Depression. There are other models, certainly. One of them is breaking apart before your eyes. The Beppe Grillo 5-star movement in Italy, that is a personality cult primarily based on anti-government ideology, not so much anti-bank, anti-government, demonization of political officials, and, of course, endlessly losing itself, as one TV commentator said. Italy has 3 million unemployed, and the jerks of the Beppe Grillo movement are fighting about 200 euros of receipts or such items. So personality cults based on anti-politician demonization, no good. Another model, let's scapegoat some group responsible for the Depression. Let's scapegoat foreigners. Let's scapegoat immigration. So this is the United Kingdom Independence Party. We've just had Grillo endorsing Farage, right? Farage, the City of London stockbroker who runs this UK Independence Party, unfortunately getting a lot of publicity on Russia Today, a very, very bad choice. And their ideas, I remember very clearly, at the height of a little tiff, a little bit of an anti-austerity protest, you might say, in London. They wanted martial law. So these people are not, they may claim to be libertarians, but they're essentially apostles of martial law, as long as it's going to be directed against recent immigrants. And then, of course, there's the right-wing anarchist rage routine. I'm afraid Kokesh has fallen into this gun fetishism and anarchist rage. This also gets you nowhere. And I don't want a march by armed reactionaries coming in. They're going to be mainly white. They're coming into the District of Columbia. What are they going to do? Intimidate the black population of the District of Columbia? Is that the goal? Intimidate the United States government? Is that the goal? Put the Congress under pressure? You go back to French history, right? The Stavisky affair and then the riots in February of 1934. A whole bunch of proto-fascist, monarchist, extreme reactionary organizations the Action Française of Marat, French Action, the Camelot du Roi of Colonel de la Roque, monarchist organization. They essentially stormed the French Chamber of Deputies and came very close to having a fascist coup d'etat in France about a year after Hitler took power in Germany. So I don't want any part of that. And I don't want situations where the shooting starts and then there's no more political activity in Washington, D.C. I intend to use the freedom for very specific purposes, and I'm confident that my method will work. These other methods will not work. So let's not have armed marches. It is a federal crime to cross a state line with a loaded rifle, and it's a crime under the District of Columbia to bring a loaded rifle into the District of Columbia. And if you wonder about that, if you saw the sweetheart interview of Kokesh with Derek McGinty of WUSA Channel 9 here in Washington, D.C., that was a softball sweetheart interview if I've ever seen one. It indicates that there are powerful oligarchical forces that want that march to happen. So I am not enthusiastic about seeing that happen. I urge people, stay home and dedicate yourself to something real. Because what's the program of this? That you get to carry a gun in the District of Columbia? You'll be just as broke. You'll be just as unable to get yourself health care or stop a foreclosure on your house or put your kid through college or have your wife see a doctor. You won't get Medicare for all with open carry. What a blind alley. What an absolute pointless exercise. And then we have the secessionists, right? And what did we have? Dennis Miller. I think we mentioned this once before, perhaps. Dennis Miller is on there with Mark Stein. Mark Stein coming from, I don't know where in the British Empire, Canada, Britain. And Mark Stein says to Dennis Miller that it's, if that socialism with Obama doesn't stop, then there's going to be secessionism and civil war. Civil war, huh? Maybe Mark Stein would like to go back where he came from if it's so awful here. Grillo, by the way, the Grillo people, there's a proposal in the Italian government to force political parties to have democratic internal primaries, right? It's sort of what happened with the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s. You remember the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was integrated, and then you had the racist old line Mississippi Democratic Party at the 1964 Democratic National Convention. The U.S. federal government has the right, I would say the obligation, of reaching into the life of political parties and saying, you're not a private club, you're not somebody's private property, you're not a for-profit enterprise, you're not here to sell things, you have got to obey laws, and including the laws against discrimination. And I think what Grillo is upset about is similar. But there are people in Grillo's movement who say there are going to be riots and there's going to be civil war. Well, that is a blind alley. Anybody who is hip-shot, eager to talk about civil war, boy, they have forgotten that is the worst of all possible outcomes. So we'll be back in just a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Do a quick international roundup. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley Program here on Unbound Radio. And we want to do a quick international roundup. Just one or two last points on this question of what activity is meaningful. Not personality cults, not the rage ball routine, not scapegoating ethnic groups, not gun fetishism, not secessionism. Oh my God! When Mark Stein of of the National Review, I don't know what, a reactionary, and as he says, an undocumented foreigner. So you just off the boat and you're already calling for secessionism. That's not good form. That's not polite. Just remember that's the enemy's policy, right? Microstates, mini-states, rump states, subdivision, partition studies, warlords. That's the enemy's approach. So you go for that from Scotland to Iraq to Pakistan. The breaking up of modern states is the enemy's policy. And if you choose to identify yourself, become an activist for the enemy's policy, then you are destroying yourself morally, intellectually, politically. You will go to the outer darkness where there is much wailing and gnashing of teeth. Case in point now, Syria, right? What's the goal there? It's the same idea. Break it up, divide it into pieces. We have two meetings this week of the death squads. There's one in Madrid going on now, and there's one in Istanbul a little bit later on. The death squads are in big trouble, and this, I think, is an important question, right? The city of Qusair, Qusayr, Qusair, the transliteration of Arabic, always a difficult proposition, but it looks like a combination of Hezbollah coming in from the Mediterranean coast side and the Syrian army coming in from the land side is crushing. They've got the death squads encircled, right? It's a battle of encirclement and a battle of annihilation, and a lot of those death squad volunteers are not going to make it out of there. And I think that is not the worst possible outcome. You'll know that the rebels are in big trouble when the British and French foreign ministers immediately say, it's time for humanitarian ceasefire, and they try to run in there and try to interpose themselves, as they did in Sri Lanka a couple of years ago, right? Miliband and Kushner, to try to defend their own terrorist forces. So once that happens, the supply line for the rebels coming in from the Mediterranean through the Hariri networks in northern Lebanon, going into Syria, that will be cut, and it will be then in the hands of the Syrian army and Hezbollah, and then they'll be driven out of Homs, driven out of Hama. They'll be driven up into the north. They'll become a kind of an enclave along the Turkish border, if they're lucky, but they're wearing out their welcome there. Remember, what have these rebels done lately? Well, they kidnapped a whole bunch of UN peacekeepers from the Philippines. It's the second time they did that. They kidnapped 2 Christian bishops. They have been accused by Carla Del Ponte of the United Nations of using chemical weapons. The bomb that went off in southern Turkey is widely blamed on the Nusra Front. They have been filmed perpetrating cannibalism, unheard of. They have been fighting among themselves. 2 death squads had a pitched battle over there in Aleppo. The Syrian army is shooting back at the Israelis, but Assad is certainly correct to say you can't make peace with the bunch of death squads, even if you thought you could and you wanted to. You can't, because they are simply a completely anarchic group. Then we got Al-Qaeda of Iraq coming in. They're supposedly even more bloodthirsty, more atrocities, more war crimes than the Nusra brigade. So JFK, I don't mean the real JFK, I mean John Forbes Kerry. How can he support this? Now, the other thing is the Russian behavior is exemplary. I've been making fun of the boiling frogs for saying there's a backdoor dirty deal between Putin and Obama to sell out the Syrians. It looks like just the opposite from where I'm sitting. I don't know. John Forbes Kerry kept waiting for 3 hours by Putin. Another former U.S. top official, Firestone, held at the Moscow airport for 17 hours and roughed up. One CIA agent arrested, the whole thing done on television. The name of the CIA resident has been revealed. It's a crisis for LaRouche. Will he support Putin and maintain his cover, or will he blow his cover and come out supporting the CIA? We'll be looking in on that one. The Yakonsk missiles, powerful anti-ship missiles supplied by Russia to Syria. The S-300P, one of the best surface-to-air missile systems in the world, being supplied by Russia to Syria. The Russian fleet from all over the world, Pacific, Northern, Baltic, elsewhere. The Mediterranean squadron is there, and the Russians are demanding that Iran and Assad be at the Geneva Conference. So, doesn't look like a betrayal. No backdoor deal, as far as I can see. Back next week on the Webster Tarpley Program. See you then. Moving along, and again, the main question right now, the question that is dividing those who are morally and intellectually and politically viable from those who are not, is their ability to see the potential represented by this bill, and above all, use it for the immediate result, to cut student loans to 0.75% interest rate. Tremendous boon to the millennials who otherwise are going to be crushed. They're going to have their lives brought to a halt, and that is a terrible thing. It also establishes the principle that the Federal Reserve has to pay. Bernanke has to finance these student loans. That is a cornucopia of cheap credit, 0% credit, 100-year credit. We need it to start a recovery, because the federal budget, the Treasury, is overloaded. It cannot be relied on to meet the entire credit needs of the United States. That's just absurd. And, of course, the zombie banks are focused on their own survival. They absorb resources. They don't do anything for the economy. So that leaves the Federal Reserve. Make Ben pay. Make Ben Bernanke cough up the money. And if you do that, you're going to take pressure off the Treasury. You're going to hello and welcome to this edition of the Webster Tarpley Program. Here we are on Unbound Radio, and I'm speaking to you as usual from Washington, D.C. And if we can just get our automated bumper music fading into the background, as it soon will, we can get going with this week's briefing. Let me call your attention, first of all, I was on Coast to Coast AM last night. George Noory, his very interesting program. It's about 3.5 million listeners. He's got 500 stations. He's on Sirius satellite radio. And naturally, my job was to alert people to the Elizabeth Warren bill. It's now the Warren-Tierney bill. Is S897 and HR 1979. HR 1979 S897. Warren-Tierney. Co-sponsor is now Congressman John Tierney from Lynn, Salem, Nahant, Massachusetts. It's the district right directly north of Boston. Does it include Newburyport? We'll take a look at that. So this is really have that memorized. 202-224-3121. And then ultimately it's going to have to be signed by Barkey. And for that, it's the White House comment line, 202-456-1414. 202-456-1414. Now, a skirmish has occurred in the House Education and Workforce Committee. This is the Klein Committee, K-L-I-N-E. Congressman Klein is a reactionary Republican from Minnesota. And I'm told by my sources in Minnesota that he is vulnerable. He could be voted out of office any time. There's a guy called Obermuller who's running against him. Klein was reelected with 54% of the votes. That's not a whole lot. He's vulnerable. But the Klein Committee did the following. Last Thursday, they had a markup on various student loan proposals. And one of the ones that they considered was H.R. 1979 S897, the Bank on Students Loan Fairness Act. And they voted it down. It was done on straight party lines. Every reactionary Republican avoid the necessity of borrowing money. You will not have to have tax increases for whatever comes out of the Fed. Because remember, they can manufacture money out of nothing, and it's right that they do it, because that is the credit-creating power of the United States of America. And in spite of all the naysayers and the nervous Nellies and the people who are running down the country, this is still the most viable economic entity. When you say the U.S. is bankrupt, you'd have to say bankrupt compared to what? And look around. The comparisons are generally not good. But let's look at the Warren-Tierney bill. On the plus side, we have co-sponsors in the Senate. We have Senator Begich of Alaska. We have Senator Boxer of California. We have Senator Landrieu of Louisiana. We have Senator Merkley of Oregon. Senator Rockefeller of West Virginia. And no, it doesn't mean that the whole thing is a plot by the New World Order. A little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. These are simply politicians endorsing a bill. On the House side, we've got, as we mentioned, Tierney of Massachusetts, Earl Blumenauer of Oregon, Rush Holt of New Jersey, Barbara Lee, Valiant, the only one who voted. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley Program. It's Unbound Radio, and it's the afternoon of Tuesday, the 21st of May. Just to repeat that, I think I ran over into the station break, but the House sponsors of the Warren-Tierney bill are, first of all, Tierney of Massachusetts, Earl Blumenauer of Oregon, Rush Holt of New Jersey, Barbara Lee, and again, what Ron Paul claimed to do, she did do. Ron Paul voted for the Afghanistan war. He voted for the authorization to use military force. He voted for all of that internal dictatorship that he later decided he didn't like, right? Ron Paul against war and police state. He voted for it before he was against it. And then you've got Yarmouth of Kentucky and David Cicilline of Rhode Island, and I'm sure there will be more of these. So those are the co-sponsors, and if your senator or congressman is not on that list, you got to get on the horn and call them, and let me just facilitate that for you. You got to come out of your corner, right? You got to get out of your comfort zone sometimes, right? If you want to change the course of world history, and you've got to get on the horn, as I say. The Capitol switchboard is 202-224-3121. If you're an activist, you should virtually